to this presentation. I'd like to invite all of you, wherever you are watching this presentation, I pray that it's going to be a blessing to you. It's a study that has challenged people for hundreds of years. And the study is on Revelation 17, the 7 kings. And come with me to Revelation 17 as we begin. We'll just read a short passage. Revelation 17 and verse 9 to 11. And here is the mind which have wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is. And the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. This is the main part of Revelation 17 we're going to be focusing on. It's been written almost as a riddle, as if God is challenging his people to come to know the truth about these 7 kings. And we're going to begin our study in Daniel chapter 2. We're going to see that Daniel chapter 2 is very important in the study of Revelation, particularly verse chapter 17. In Daniel 2, in verse 43, we have Daniel explaining the vision to Nebuchadnezzar, the dream he had. And he gets down to the toes. And we read here in verse 43, Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So here we see, coming down to the last remnant of earth's history, the toes of the image of Daniel. We know that the next thing that happened in the dream was the stone that was cut out without hands, symbolizing Christ's second coming, and that it would smite the image. And just before Christ's second coming, we see this mingling of iron and clay. With this in mind, if we can break down these 2 symbols, it will give us an understanding of what's to happen in the latter days, as Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar. The iron we know is as the previous metals of the gold of Babylon, the brass and the silver and the iron of Rome. They're all metals symbolizing a state or a kingdom. And so here the iron in the toes, again, is a symbol of a state, of a kingdom, governments and nations. But what does the clay represent? Because we see a mingling together of the clay and the iron. Who is a state mingling with? Come with me to Isaiah, chapter 64. We're seeking to find out what the clay represents in the prophecy. In Isaiah 64:8, God's speaking to his people, and he says, But now, O Lord, thou art our Father. Sorry, this is the prophet speaking to God. Thou art our Father, we are the clay. Thou art our potter, and we all are the work of thy hand. So here we see the clay as a symbol of God's people. They are the work of his hand, and he's the potter who shapes, molds, and guides his people, his church. A similar passage in Jeremiah, chapter 18. This is an interesting passage because here the Lord showed Jeremiah, who takes him to a potter's house, and he showed him how a vessel came out crooked and how the potter would cast it aside. And he's teaching Jeremiah a lesson here of what he would do if his people continued to disobey him and not want to be led and guided by him. And with that example, after showing what he did with the crooked vessel, he says in verse 6 of Jeremiah 18, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as this potter, saith the Lord? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. So here we see again that the clay represents those who are in God's hands, those who are guided by him, his church, his people. With this in mind, when we come back to Daniel, We see that the metal, the iron representing the states or the kingdoms, the clay we've seen represents God's people. And we see a mingling between the governments or the state of the day and the clay, God's people. But what does it tell us about the clay? Verse 43. Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. The clay is miry clay. It's a clay which cannot be worked. It's clay which is dirty, which cannot be used by the Lord. And so what we have here is a mingling or a marriage, an illicit union between the governments and the miry clay or the apostate church, a dirty church. And this, keep in mind, is happening just before the Lord returns. You see, we've always understood Daniel 2, the toes, representing the 10 divisions of the Western Europe. And this is true, but Daniel 2 takes you to the second coming. When the Lord returns, his return does not affect just Western Europe, but all the world. So there's a much greater application, a much deeper application to the toes. And the miry clay, representing the apostate church at that time, who would be having secret illicit affairs or an illegal union with the state. This is when the Lord returns. And this is what we're going to see very clearly now in Revelation 17. Keep in mind also, in Daniel 2, we've always taught that the 10 toes of Daniel 2 represent the nations of Europe, which is true. And they're mingling together but not cleaving one to another. We've always looked at examples like Napoleon, who sought to unite Europe, Kaiser Wilhelm, Hitler, and even through the royal families trying to intermarriage in uniting Europe. But we've always seen that the prophecy said they would not cleave one to another. But I believe there's a deeper application, and not so much the nations of Europe not cleaving one to another, because today in Europe we have the European Parliament. We have many nations members of this European Union. They have one parliament. They have one military force, NATO. They have one currency, the euro. So today Europe is more divided than it ever was, more united than it ever was before. Much more than Napoleon or Hitler or anyone else could have ever hoped for. So if that's the interpretation of the prophecy, then it's come to naught, because today we see united Europe with many member countries, particularly those original nations, the Lombards, Italy, the Alemanni, the Germans, the Franks, the French, etc., the Saxons, the English, and many more nations as well. Notice again in Daniel 2, let's read verse 44 now. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Where it says in the days of these kings, to whom is it referring? The previous two verses is speaking about the iron and clay. And we saw that the iron there representing the nations and the governments in the latter part of Earth's history. Many have understood this verse to be referring to the previous kingdoms of the image, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Imperial Rome. But when the Lord returns, these kingdoms have already passed into history for a long time. The days of these kings referring to in verse 44 is referring to the kings in the toes, the iron of the iron and clay mingling together. It's this mingling, these governments at that time, that is when the Lord returns. With this in mind, notice this statement, this passage from the Peshitta Bible. The Peshitta Bible is a good Bible to use for Daniel, because it's translated from the Aramaic, which Daniel's great portion of is written in. And whereas thou saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with one another in marriage. But they shall not cleave one to another, just as iron does not mix with clay. Notice in this translation, the mixing together is called a marriage. It's what we've been discovering. The mingling together of the church and the state, the apostate church and the state of the time. And the Spirit of Prophecy also commenting on this same verse. And we're told it's the mingling of churchcraft and statecraft is represented by the iron and the clay. This union is weakening all the power of the churches. This investing the church with the power of the state will bring evil results. So once again we see that the mingling of the iron and clay, as we saw from the symbols, the metal and the miry clay, inspiration here confirms it's the mingling or the marriage of an apostate church and the state. And notice the word she uses here. She uses the word craft, meaning it's done in an underhanded manner. The word craft is a word that means secretly, craftily, not out in the open. So here we see in the toes of Daniel, the last remnant of time before the Lord returns, there'll be an underhanded secret union between an apostate church and the governments of the 10 kings controlling the world at that time. With this in mind, let's start our study now in Revelation 17. And we'll see again exactly what we learnt in Daniel. Let us read verse 1 and 2 of Revelation 17. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore, that sitteth upon many waters. And notice this great whore, what she's been doing. And notice, it's very important, the angel is going to show John and us the judgment of the whore, of this apostate church. In order to show somebody the judgment, you have to produce the evidence. And that's what Revelation 17 and the following verses will do. It will produce the evidence to show why she's being judged, this great whore. One of the things she's done, it says in verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. That's what we saw in Daniel 2. That's what we see in this statement here. The mingling of churchcraft and statecraft. And she's commenting on Daniel 2:43, the mingling of the iron and clay. And we come to Revelation 17, and we read that the great whore, which sitteth upon many waters, in other words, controlling all nations, she's been committing fornication with the kings of the earth, or the rulers, the states, the governments of the earth. So here we see another interesting parallel between Daniel and Revelation 17. Now, Revelation 17 is comprised of three parts. Verse 1 and 2, we have the invitation to come hither, to see the judgment of the great whore. Verses 3 through to 6, we have the entire vision. And from verse 7 through to the end, verse 18, we have the angel giving the interpretation to John. But as we saw as we began our study, when we read verses 9 to 11, although the angel gives the interpretation, it's given in a way which only God can reveal, as Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar. He is the revealer of secrets. It's not explained in a plain way that is easy to understand. That's why this passage has for so long been so difficult for people to interpret. Nonetheless, we're going to go through it now and see if we can break down these symbols and understand the interpretation, particularly regarding the 5 fallen kings. Regarding the 5 fallen kings, there are many interpretations. To list just a few, there's one interpretation that explains that the 7 Roman emperors, that the angel speaking to John, who was a prisoner in Patmos of the Roman Empire at the time, when the angel says to John, there are 7 kings and 5 are fallen, it's taken to be that from that point, the time of the Roman Emperor in John's day, 5 emperors had fallen previously, and so they named consecutive emperors leading up to the emperor ruling in the days of the Apostle John. This, of course, cannot be supported from Scripture, nor does it span anywhere near the length of history that we're going to see that this chapter takes in. Another interpretation, that which is closer to the mark, is that the 5 fallen kings begin with Egypt, Assyria, and then we have the kingdoms of Daniel, Babylon, Medo, Persia, and Greece. And again, the reasoning here is that Roman Empire was ruling in John's day, and so counting back from the Roman Empire, they had to count 5 fallen kings. And they count Greece, who was previous, then Medo-Persia, then Babylon, and then they run out of kingdoms, at least referring to Daniel 2. And so Assyria and then Egypt are placed because they were certainly enemies of God's people. But the trouble with this interpretation as well is you cannot support it, particularly from Daniel and Revelation. And God's people had other enemies like the Syrians as well, not only the Egyptians and the Assyrians. So this study also has some problems with harmony with the book of Daniel and Revelation 13. Another interpretation is this one, which has some people believing and teaching today, more current interpretation, although it has been around for some time. And basically it teaches that the 7 kings are 7 popes. The 6th king being the late John Paul, who died. They say he's the one who's the 6th king. The 7th being Pope Benedict, the current pope. And the 8th, because the scripture says the 8th is of the 7, this study shows that the 8th is really John Paul, the 6th, who comes back and all the world wonders after him. This study here has some aspects about it which are very appealing to Seventh-day Adventists, particularly because we teach the truth regarding the state of the dead. We know the dead cannot come back to life, as the scripture teaches. And we know that when these apparitions do appear, they are demons or evil angels seeking to deceive and imposing themselves as a past loved one. And so here where we have this study showing Pope John Paul coming back, it's very appealing to Adventists because they know that Pope John Paul could not come back, and yet a demon impersonating him is really the 8th and is of the 7, the beast which goes into the bottomless pit. Another problem with this study is you cannot support it from Scripture. There are some aspects to it that sound interesting, seem appealing, but you cannot support this from Daniel. You cannot support this from Revelation. You cannot support this from Daniel 2 particularly. And if it's 7 popes, you can bring up 7 or something else, because the evidence, there's no evidence to support it. Another problem with this study is the timing. This whole study is built upon one thing, and that is the timing. 1929, the signing of the Lateran Treaty. They count 7 kings from 1929 forward. And they show that 5 have fallen, John Paul being the 6th, and Benedict, the current Pope, is the 7th. In fact, all the previous interpretations we mentioned, whether it's the 7 Roman emperors, or Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece, all these interpretations are hinged upon the timing. It's from when you count the 5 fallen kings. What we'll see in this study is that if we can get the correct timing to count the kings, everything else falls into place. And particularly we'll see that it'd be before 1929. And it's upon everyone who possibly believes the study of the 7 popes, they'll acknowledge that if it can be shown that 1929 is too late to count the kings have fallen before then, they'll acknowledge that the study then collapses. But I say this in respect, not wishing to offend anybody, and just pray that you'll follow me through this study and see how it comes, and pray about it and study it for yourself. Come with me now to Revelation 17 and verse 3. John is about to be taken off in vision. He says some very interesting words. In verse 3 we read, So he carried me away into the Spirit, into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. First we need to identify the woman. And the same chapter will tell us who the woman is. Let's read verse 5. And upon her forehead was written the name, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. Verse 18. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So here we see that the woman in Revelation 17 is Babylon, that great city that reigneth over the kings of the earth. Let's look at a few more verses. Revelation 14 and verse 8. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city. Revelation 16 and verse 19. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Once again we see that great city referring to Babylon. Revelation 18 and verse 10. Standing afar off, for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Revelation 18:16. And you can go right through to the end of the chapter. And saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen, and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. So here we see clearly that the woman in Revelation 17:3 is Babylon, a great counterfeit system that reigneth over the kings of the earth. But Babylon represents more than just Rome. It's clearly an identifying mark for the papacy. But when we read, for example, come with me to Revelation 18, verse 24. And in her, this is in the woman, in that great city Babylon, was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Here we see that Babylon encompasses every false and system which is against God and his people and his truth. Babylon goes all the way back to Cain, even to heaven itself, where Satan first rebelled against God and his throne. It encompasses spiritualism, paganism, apostate Protestantism. It encompasses Islam, Judaism. All these religions are part of Babylon. Any teaching, any religion which takes people away from God and teaches another God, another system of worship, is part of this counterfeit system that the devil, Satan of course, is behind. With this in mind, let's read verse 4 now in Revelation 17. The woman Babylon, notice how she's arrayed. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. We just read the same thing in Revelation 18 about the great city. And decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So notice how Babylon, this system of Satan, this counterfeit system, notice how it clothes itself. Notice how it's arrayed. In purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious jewels, stones, and having a golden cup in her hand. This is clearly a identifying mark of the papacy and the priesthood and the robes they wear and the colors they wear. So what we see is this counterfeit system arrayed as a Christian church. Satan's religion, disguising, arraying, clothing itself as God's church, as his people. And this was vividly brought to me not recently when I attended a funeral service. And it was in a Catholic church. A Catholic priest was officiating, and he was arrayed exactly as this text describes. Purple and scarlet color. He had gold embroidered through his garments. And when he was officiating over their so-called communion service, he held up a golden cup. And I couldn't believe the exactness with this text and what I was seeing before my eyes. In fact, I had a Bible with me, and I opened it and I read this verse. And I passed it to my wife, who was beside me. She in turn was reading the description, looking up to the priest officiating. It's purple and scarlet and gold, golden cup in his hand. And she too was taken by surprise at how accurate the scripture is. Then she did something else. She passed it to her brother. I didn't expect this, as his brother's a Catholic. But he was looking at the priest, looking at this verse, and later outside he told me, He was amazed at the accuracy of the Bible. And so here we see a wonderful description of the papacy in the last days and how she is clothed as a Christian church. And take note, friends, in verse 3, that it's the woman who is sitting upon the scarlet-coloured beast. She's controlling the beast. She's riding upon it. When you ride upon a beast, you control the beast where it's to go. In other words, Babylon is the system behind Rome. You see, both the beast in Revelation 17 and the woman are symbols of the papacy. The woman symbolizes from where the papacy receives its doctrines, from Babylon. And the beast symbolizes who the papacy is, or the church, the papacy. You have the literal, the papacy, the church, the physical church on earth that people identify with. The woman identifies the spiritual, who's behind it, who truly is the teachings that this church brings forth. That's why she is riding or controlling the beast's power. Now we're going to identify also in the same verse who the beast's power is. And in doing so, let us compare some passages, Revelation 17 and Revelation 13. In Revelation 13, we know that the beast, the first beast power that rises up out of the sea, is the papal church. We have the geographical location. We see that it's absorbed the teachings and the systems from these previous kingdoms of the Greeks, the Medo-Persians, and the Babylonians. And that one of its heads was wounded to death, and we teach correctly that it refers to the wound the papacy received at the end of the 1260 years. It goes on to teach us they would reign for 42 months. And so, clearly the beast of Revelation 13, the first beast, is the papacy. Let us see how it harmonizes with Revelation 17. In Revelation 17:3 we read, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Notice the comparison in Revelation 13. "And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy." So here we see the same beast. It has 7 heads, it has 10 horns, it has names of blasphemy. There are some differences. In Revelation 13, it has crowns upon its horns. And in Revelation 17, it has a scarlet colour. We'll see what both these points are alluding to. But here we see clearly some parallels. Again, Revelation 17:8, we see that the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Notice again this 7-headed beast, that it's going to ascend out of a bottomless pit. And after ascending out of the bottomless pit, it's that when the world begins to wonder after him. And it's those whose names are not written in the book of life. And in Revelation 13:3 we see, regarding the same beast, "I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." So Revelation 13 and 17 are both bringing out the same power, where the whole world wonders after it, after its wound is healed. And again, who is it that wonders after this beast's power? Those whose names are not written in the book of life, of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So clearly, friends, the beast of Revelation 17 is the papal church. The same papacy that's brought out in Revelation 13. Come back now to Revelation 17 and verse 3. We receive the time frame now for the beginning of the vision. "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness." Now when John records these words, he tells us that the angel carried him away into the wilderness. This phrase, "into the wilderness," is only used 3 times in Revelation. Twice in Revelation 12. And both times it clearly refers to God's people, his church. during their wilderness experience for the 42 months. And here, we're told that John's carried away into the wilderness. Let us see if it's the same. Notice the comparison here. Revelation 17:3. So he carried me away into the spirit, into the wilderness. And notice what he sees. He sees the woman sitting upon the scarlet-coloured beast. And in Revelation 12:14, and this is now God's church, the good church, to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly where? Into the wilderness. Into a place where she is nourished for how long? A time, times, and a half a time, from the face of the serpent. So could it be that the into the wilderness experience of Revelation 17 is referring to the same wilderness time period as Revelation 12:14? Let's read on. Let's read verse 6. Notice what John sees when he's taken in vision into the wilderness. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with greatest admiration. You see, friends, what John was shown in vision into the wilderness was the 1260-year period, the time, times, and a half a time, where God's people were persecuted. And that is how graphically he describes it. Where the woman was drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. John clearly saw the wilderness period where the woman, the papal church, was persecuting God's people. And this is why you have the scarlet color for the beast in Revelation 17, the scarlet symbolizing the persecution that the people went through at that time at the hands of the papacy. Incidentally, the other symbol we saw that differed in Revelation 13 was the crowns. In Revelation 13, you see the papacy rising up to power, coming up from among the 10 divisions of Western Europe. And when the little horn rose to power, she rose among 10 kingdoms. This is why they had crowns on their heads, because they were ruled by sovereign rulers. When you come to Revelation 17, the crowns are no longer there, because now it's a worldwide application, as we saw earlier in Daniel 2 on the toes. Now the application encompasses all the world. And now there are governments, so-called republics or democracies, controlling Protestantism. And so they're no longer controlled by a singular head. So the crowns have been removed, because in Revelation 17, you're coming right down to the last period of time. So we've established that the wilderness, into the wilderness that John is taken, is the 1260-year period. This too reminds me of the study of the 7 popes, because in this study, this little phrase is very important. It's stated that the wilderness experience here belongs to the papacy, that the papacy also has a wilderness experience, and they rightly suggest that the wilderness experience is an experience of suffering or persecution or loss of power, which is true, it certainly was with God's people. But they place this wilderness experience for the papacy. The reasoning being that the papacy received its wound in 1798. And they say this is the wilderness experience. The wound is healed in 1929. And that's when they count their 5 fallen kings. But we have seen that the wilderness here is referring to the 1260. It's not referring to 1798 onwards, but before. Because what John clearly testifies is that he saw the blood of God's people martyred. And so this is another point to keep in mind regarding the study of the 7 popes. Notice what else in verse 6 John says, after seeing this vision, after seeing incidentally, John's vision is very similar to what Daniel saw in Daniel 7, where he saw the saints worn out, the saints of the Most High being worn out by that little horn power. And they were both left feeling quite astonished by what they saw. And this is exactly what John is bringing out here when he says, I wondered with great admiration. What this word really means, he was not admiring what he saw. He was seeing the persecution of millions of people. What John is saying here is that he wondered with great astonishment, with great wonderment at what he was seeing. Why was he wondering? Why was he so astonished? Because John was not a stranger to persecution. He himself, at the time of the writing of the Revelation, was a prisoner of persecution. So what astonished him so much? It's because of what he saw. Remember, he said the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet. He saw cardinals, priests. He saw people professing to be Christians, Christian leaders, bringing saints before them in trials, condemning them, torturing them, killing them, burning them at the stake. That's what was so astonishing to him. He didn't see some pagan or some worldly power persecuting God's people, which he was used to. He never saw this before. Certainly with the Jews to some degree, yes. But this were people who believed in Christ. They were Christians. That was Christian church. And so he's left here totally astonished at what he saw in this vision. And we come to verse 7, and the angel says, he says to John, don't worry, John. I'm going to explain it to you. It may be a mystery now, but by the time we finish, you'll understand what you saw. And the angel said unto me, why did thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carried her, which had the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So that the angel is going to begin to explain to John exactly what he saw regarding this woman, and regarding the beast that carried her, and the 7 heads and 10 horns. He begins now in verse 8. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. This verse here, verse 8, is the most important verse in this whole chapter, in the whole prophecy. If we break down this verse correctly, we've seen that the woman refers to Babylon. We've seen that the beast is the papal church. When we understand these 3 phrases that are mentioned here, we'll be able to key the rest of the prophecy together. But notice something very important. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. The was, the is not, and the ascending out of the bottomless pit all belong to the beast. There's nobody else involved here. The beast we've seen is the papal church. And the angel is saying to John that this beast is going to go through 3 phases, 3 time periods, 3 conditions. The first one is was. The second one will be is not period. And the third will be when it ascends out of the bottomless pit, or as the verse ends it says, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. There are 3 time periods that belong to the papacy that we need to decipher. And notice the order. The order also is important. They come in an order. First the was period, then the is not, and then the yet is. Notice if we read the verse, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. It's finally going to go into destruction. Where it ends, it says, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. The yet is equal to the ascending out of the bottomless pit, the third condition of the papacy. Notice if you take the center out of the verse. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. When they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is. The yet is and ascending out of the bottomless pit go together. They parallel each other, as do the first 2 periods. Now, how do we decipher what these 3 periods refer to? First of all, the bottomless pit period, or the middle stage there. What does the bottomless pit period mean in reference to the papacy? We know in Luke chapter 8, where Jesus is recorded, was casting demons out of a man. And they said unto the Lord, send us not into the abyss. And they asked that they be sent into the pigs. And that word abyss is the same word here, bottomless pit. And so it seems from that account that it was possibly a literal place. It may well be, but one thing is certain, the demons did not want to go there. The reasoning is, in going there, they were to lose any power, any authority, any advantage they had to exercise their demonic ways over the people. They would be restricted in the bottomless pit. And because it's referred here to the papacy, the beast that thou sawest, it cannot be simply only a literal place. Because as we're going to see through these 3 time periods, the papacy did not go somewhere literal. But it went through a certain condition where it was loss of its power and authority. Come with me to Revelation 20. Let's have a look at a verse here regarding this. Speaking of Satan, Revelation 20, 1 through to 3. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold of the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. And we've always rightly taught from this passage that the bottomless pit experience there for Satan, yes, it's this barren earth, but he's bound by circumstances. There is no one to deceive. There's no one for him to exercise his power over. He's restricted. Notice how verse 3 goes on to say, and that they cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him. Notice the words. Shut him up, set a seal upon him, cast him into the bottomless pit. All describing the condition that Satan will be in for the 1,000 years. A condition where he's totally sealed, shut up, controlled. He can no longer, as it goes on to say, the passage goes on to say, but he should what? Deceive the nations no more. So clearly the bottomless pit, when it comes to the papacy, is a period she goes through where she loses her power, her authority, and her will over the people. Did this happen to the papacy? It certainly did. The papacy, the bottomless pit experience is when she received her deadly wound, where she lost her power and her authority, her influence over the people, the backing of the military, and the support of the kings of Europe. The third phase period, the yet is, as we see here on the slide, is equal to the ascending out of the bottomless pit. So the angel's telling John and us in Revelation 17 that although the papacy will go into this bottomless pit experience where she loses her power and her authority, she's going to ascend out of there. And this is the yet is phase. And we know that also happened when her deadly wound was healed in 1929, and she once again became a church state. Once again the Pope became a king and governing and having authority within the Vatican City. Notice now when we compare this with Revelation 13. Revelation 17:8, the beast that thou sawest was, we saw that refers to the 1260-year period, because John testified that he was taken off into vision, and he saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And the angel answers John and he says, the beast that thou sawest, when? During the 1260. He says that beast that thou sawest was. In other words, referring to that period. So the was phase is the 42 months where the papacy had control all over Europe. And notice how it compares with Revelation 13 verse 2 and 5. Speaking of the papacy when it rose to power, it says, and the beast which I saw, the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and the power was given unto him to continue for how long? 42 months. Here we see the same period of Revelation 17:8. The dragon, that's Satan working through Emperor Justinian in 538, issued a decree that the Pope of Rome would be the head of the Universal Church, Catholic Church. And he was given his seat in Rome and great authority from the emperor himself. And for how long was he to continue? 42 months, the 1260-year period. And that's what we see in Revelation 17:8 when the beast that thou sawest was. It's the 1260-year period that John was taken into the wilderness. Then we saw something was to happen. The beast was to go into a bottomless pit experience. And the next thing we're told in Revelation 17:8 is the beast that thou sawest was and is not. It's when she receives her deadly wound. She was no longer in power. And again, notice how it compares with Revelation 13 and verse 3. And I saw one of his heads, this is the beast power of Revelation 13, the papacy, as it was, wounded to death. And again, we know that happened in 1798 at the end of the 1260. That's the is not period. The third period was when the beast, the papacy, would ascend out of the bottomless pit, the yet is stage. Revelation 17:8 we read, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And notice importantly here, when it's the people that wonder after the beast, after the wound is healed, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is, after he ascends out of the bottomless pit, that's when the world really begins to wonder after the beast. And we saw that graphically here only last year when the Pope visited Australia, and hundreds of thousands of pilgrims came from all around the world to wonder after him. In Revelation 13:3 it parallels and it says, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So by comparing Revelation 17 and 13, we see clearly those three periods, the was, the is not, and the yet is, refer to the three phases of the papacy. It's ruling for 1260, its wound, the is not, and then its wound being healed, it's ascending out of the bottomless pit, and all the world beginning to wonder after it. Notice we can illustrate it like this. The was period, 538 to 1798, 1260 years of papal supremacy. The is not period, 1798, when the papacy received its deadly wound. It's lost both its civil and ecclesiastical power. And the yet is. It would come out of that bottomless pit experience. And we saw in Revelation 13:3 that his deadly wound would be healed, and all the world would wonder after the beast. And this happened when? In 1929, when the papacy once again received its civil power. So to summarize what we've learned so far, the vision begins in the wilderness during the period of 538 to 1798. John testifies that he saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And that was the was period, as we see here. Then something was to happen. The papacy received a deadly wound. It lost its power and authority. It went into the next phase, which was the is not, in 1798. And now the third phase, as we see here, it would come out of the bottomless pit experience, the yet is. It would ascend and would be fully restored to full civil and ecclesiastical authority. This date of 1929 is a very important prophetic date. We don't maybe pay as much attention as we should. If you study the Lateran Treaty, it truly was a healing of the deadly wound, because the papacy received immense treasures from the Italian government. She received much property. Not only the Vatican City, which is about 100 acres, but much bigger estates all through Italy. She received basilicas through Rome. She received a huge compensation payout that amassed to a fortune that the Italian government had to pay. And she was recognized as an independent state, a republic, where the Pope was its head and civil ruler. In 1929, the papacy's wound was truly healed. We come down now to Revelation 17, verse 9. The angel has explained that the beast would go through these three periods. And now he says in verse 9, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which this woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen and 1 is. The other is not yet come, and when he cometh he must continue a short space. So now we're told that the 7 heads upon the beast represent 7 mountains. And it goes on to say, these 7 mountains are 7 kings. In the original it reads this way. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and are 7 kings, 5 are fallen. The word there in your King James is not in the original. It actually reads exactly as you see it here on the slide. The heads are 7 mountains. The 7 mountains are 7 kings. And this actually fits perfectly with Bible prophecy, because Often in the Bible, a mountain is a symbol for a kingdom. There are many examples. For example, in Jeremiah 51, verse 24 and 25, Babylon is called a great destroying mountain. The kingdom of Babylon is called a destroying mountain. In Isaiah 11, verse 9, Isaiah 56, 7, Isaiah 57, verse 13, and Isaiah 2 and Daniel 2, verse 35, are all describing God's kingdom as a holy mountain. So a mountain is clearly a symbol for a kingdom. And this is exactly what Revelation 17, 9 and 10 is telling us. That the 7 heads upon the beast are 7 mountains and which represent 7 kingdoms, kings or kingdoms. And notice the woman is sitting upon them. Again, we see the woman of Babylon controlling the kingdoms. Now we need to discover who these 7 kingdoms are, particularly the 5 who are fallen. And in order to do this, we need to follow a biblical principle in studying particularly prophecy. We are counseled to study the books of Daniel and Revelation together, that they will explain each other. And when we are studying one prophecy, we have to study other prophecies that deal with the same subject matter. And one will shed light upon another until we build upon it, until more light is shed, until the chain is complete. With this in mind, we already saw some parallels between Daniel 2 and Revelation 17. We saw many parallels with Revelation 12, Revelation 17, and Revelation 13. So with this in mind, we're going to go to Daniel. And we're going to look at some parallels between Daniel 2 and Revelation 17, which is going to help us establish who the 5 fallen kings are. In Daniel 2, it brings us down to the second coming of Christ, where the stone that is cut out falls upon the image. So the second coming of Christ, where he overcomes his enemies. And Revelation 17 also reveals that the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. This is his title at his second coming. Daniel 2 reveals the last worldwide power is papal Rome, the little horn in Daniel 7. Revelation 17 also reveals the last worldwide power is the papacy. Daniel 2 shows the head of the image is Babylon. In Revelation 17 we read that in verse 5, that mystery, Babylon, the great mother of all harlots. Daniel 2, that we saw the 10 toes represent the 10 nations of Western Europe, but we saw there was a greater and wider application. Revelation 17 also reveals that the 10 horns are 10 kings. The earth divided into 10 divisions or 10 nations which receive the power, and they give their power and strength unto the beast. In Daniel 2:44 we saw that in the days of these kings, the 10 toes representing the 10 divisions of Western Europe, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom. And this idea is repeated and enlarged, where the 10 horns represent the 10 divisions of the New World Order, who ally themselves with Rome to make war with the Lamb, but they are overcome by the Lord of lords and King of kings. Daniel 2 reveals a succession of kingdoms. As one falls, another rises. And Revelation 17 also speaks of 7 kings. It says 5 are fallen and 1 is, the other is not yet come. Again we see a succession of kings or kingdoms following each other. With this parallel in mind, let us go back to Revelation 17 now and see if we can establish the timing, and then we'll see how the kings line up with Daniel 2. Come back to Revelation 17 and verse 8. We saw the vision was during the 1260-year period, and that was called the was period. Revelation 17:8. The beast that thou sawest was, 1260, which brings us to 1798, the end of it. And now the angel says, and is not. We saw that was the next phase of the papacy, the wounded stage, 1798 to 1929. And the angel goes on to say, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Notice carefully, the was period is past now. He said, John, that's what you saw, that's past now. Now she is in the is not stage, the wounded stage. And she shall ascend, which is still future. Was is past tense. The ascending out of the bottomless pit is still future. The present tense is the is not. That's where you count your 5 fallen kings from. Because that's where he goes on to say, and there are 7 kings, and 5 have fallen. So our timing is from 1929. From between 1798 and 1929, the is not period, the wounded stage, or the bottomless pit experience. We count from here, we count backwards, 5 fallen kings. Notice how it fits. The first time I did this study, I was counting from the wilderness period, the 1260. I could only get 4 kings who had fallen. I knew Daniel was the key, and it was clearly connected. Because Daniel brings us to Revelation 13, you have the leopard-like beast, with the feet of the bear and the mouth of the lion. Incidentally, the mouth of the lion is interesting because it shows you that he's going to speak the doctrines of Babylon and the dragon in pagan Rome, giving him his seat and power and great authority. So I knew there was a connection with Daniel 2, Revelation 13 and Daniel 17, but I could only get 4 kingdoms because my timing was out. This is why the timing is so important. I could only, counting from the wilderness period, I only had pagan Rome, Greece, Medo-Persia, Babylon. I was short 1 kingdom. But now we bring the vision forward. The angel says that's past now. The beast is now in the is not stage, so we count from the is not stage. And from when the papacy receives its deadly wound, we can count 5 fallen kingdoms. Notice on the slide here. The 5th is papal Rome, as we saw during the 1260 reign. The 4th fallen king is imperial Rome. The 3rd was Greece, the 2nd Medo-Persia, and of course the 1st was Babylon. And notice, friends, with this in mind, as we spoke earlier about the study with the 7 popes, we're counting from 1798, we're counting backwards, not forwards. Whereas the 7 popes counted forward from there, but the angel said that period was still future. The angel said that he has not yet ascended out of the bottomless pit. That was still a future period in the context of the vision that the papacy was to go through. And the angel says that it's at that period that 5 have fallen. And here we have perfect harmony with the book of Daniel and Revelation 13. Notice also something else. Revelation 17, notice the time frame that it spans. Daniel 2 brings us from the kingdom of Babylon right through all the major kingdoms to the end of Earth's history, to the second coming of Christ. Revelation 17 is doing the same thing. It's starting from Babylon all the way through, as we're going to see in verse 14, to the second coming of Christ. Revelation 17 spans the same time period as Daniel 2, only it's shedding much more light upon the last days. Remember also in Revelation 13 we saw that the beast power, one of its heads was wounded to death. So our understanding of the 5 fallen kings, it fits both the context of Revelation 17, the timing is correct, and it's in perfect harmony with Daniel 2 and Revelation 13. Come now we're up to verse 10 of Revelation 17. We're up to the 6th king. And there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen. There's our 5 fallen kings, the 5th being papal Rome, the 1260. And he says, and one is, the one is obviously, the 6th king obviously is the next phase of the papacy, the wounded stage, the is not. And the other, again notice how the other is not yet come. And again notice its future application. The other is not yet come of Revelation 17:10. Parallel it with Revelation 17:8 where it says, and he shall ascend. Revelation 17:8 and Revelation 17:10 go together. When you connect these 2 texts, the whole prophecy comes together. Very important. So we have our 5 fallen kings. One is, that was the papacy during its wounded stage, 1798 to 1929. The other is not yet come. That's when the wound would be healed. That was still future at that time. And when he cometh, notice, when he cometh, this is the 7th king now. How long does he continue? A short space. We are currently living at the time of the 7th king. I've noticed with some interpretations here when we get to verse 10, people want to bring in America or other powers to make up this number of kings. It may seem strange that the last 3 kings are all Rome, but that's what the prophecy is saying. The beast that thou sawest was and is not and yet is. He shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. He has not yet come. It's not referring to anybody else. We can't put America in here specifically because it doesn't. Because this prophecy, these three phases, apply to the papacy. And secondly, notice the seventh king, how long he shall continue. It says a short space. And although this is an unlimited time period, nonetheless it's a short period. And notice how perfectly that fits with our interpretation so far. The seventh king is the yet is stage when the papacy was sent out of the bottomless pit. That happened in 1929. From 1929 to our day, which we are living in, is 79 years. This is a comparatively very short space when it's compared to the time frame this prophecy spans, and particularly some of the reigns of the earlier kingdoms, like Papal Rome, 1260, Imperial Rome, almost 700 years, etc. So it is a short space. But America, if you were to put America here, not only does it not fit the context, America actually comes in verse 13 and 12. We're told clearly from the Spirit of Prophecy that America comes into this prophecy in the latter part of the chapter, where we see this union with the 10 kings of the world, which we're going to see in a moment. Now notice how long the king rules. Only 79, only a short space. Again, we are living right at the time of the seventh king, and we're very close to the end of that period. Notice the chart here. Revelation 17:8, the beast that thou sawest was. These are the two passages I was saying that we need to study together. Revelation 17:8 and Revelation 17:10. The beast that thou sawest was. And we saw that was a past tense. That was Papal Rome during the 1260-year period. And in Revelation 17:10, the five are fallen. We saw that the fifth fallen kingdom was Papal Rome, the fifth king, during that period when it received its wound. 17:8 continues to say, and is not. We saw that was Papal Rome wounded during that period of 1798 to 1929. And Revelation 17:10 goes on to say, and one is. And again, paralleling with Papal Rome during its wounded stage. Revelation 17:8 went on to say, in the third period, they would ascend out of the bottomless pit, or the yet is stage, which was still future. Papal Rome after its healing in 1929. And Revelation 17:10 also saying the other king, not yet come, was still future, where Papal Rome would be healed in 1929 again, the time we are living in. Now we come down to verse 11. And we're told that the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth, and is of the seven. And it's going into perdition. It's going to be destroyed. How is the beast now, the eighth beast or the eighth king, different from the previous kingdoms? Remember we saw earlier in our study in Daniel 2 that there would be a mingling of churchcraft and statecraft, or a mingling of the church and the state, the apostate church and the governments of the world. When we come down to verse 10, where you have the seventh king, our day, where the wound has been healed, the papacy has received its authority. It received its property, vast treasures. It has influence over the nations. It has its own civil rule, its own laws, its own currency. The wound is truly healed, but something is still missing. What is missing from the papacy today, which differs the seventh king from the eighth? The difference is that the papacy today, from 1929, although she has her power and authority, it's confined to her boundaries, the Vatican City. We know secretly her influence is much greater, as we saw at the beginning of Revelation 17, where she's committing fornication with the kings of the earth. But outwardly, Rome has no jurisdiction or no power over anybody else. You cannot be persecuted by Rome if you differ from what she believes. Her authority rests within the Vatican City. This is where she differs. Although the wound is healed, she is still not where Satan is seeking to bring this to its climax. In Revelation 17 and verse 11, the eighth king will be when the papacy is restored completely to once again worldwide dominion. Notice the next two verses. This is what is missing from the seventh king. The seventh king, she has her authority and her power, her treasures, but she does not have the backing of a military government, nor does she have the influence over other nations. But look what happens next in the prophecy. Verse 12 and 13. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. Again, notice the future application there. But receive power as kings 1 hour with who? The beast. So now she's going to receive, the eighth is going to receive something that the others didn't have. She's going to receive support, power and strength from who? These 10 kings. In Maranatha, page 187, we are told clearly these 10 kings. These 10 kings are Protestantism, particularly America, and beginning in America and going worldwide. As we know, the papacy, from our study in Revelation 13, uses the second beast of Revelation 13, or America, to institute her laws and her dogmas upon the people. And so here we see this coming together now, as where we began in Daniel 2, where these 10 kings give their power and their strength unto the beast, or the papacy. And they have, and now at the 8th king you have the completion of what Satan has been seeking to do from the very beginning. Finally, you have the accumulation of everything he's endeavored to do. Total world control and total dominion over the entire earth. Revelation 17, 12 and 13 is the New World Order. It's where all the nations, these 10 kings, represent the powers of the world at that time. Whether it's 10 divisions, this part of the prophecy we cannot speculate because it's happening as we speak today, but there's still things to be fulfilled there. But nonetheless, we know that it'll be a union of the governments, the powers of the world are going to come together in union, and they're going to give their power and their strength to the papacy. We're told clearly here in prophecy. And when this happens, we know there will be the image of the beast will be set up. We know there will be a national Sunday law. And we know that people will be coerced, those who will not worship the beast or its image. There will be religious laws enacted against them. So as the 8th king, we see Satan's masterpiece complete. Total dominion over the entire world through the papacy. One world government, a one world religion. This is why verse 18 of Revelation 17 says, "That woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth." Notice something else in Revelation 17:11. The beast with it that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7. This also is interesting. Again, another identifying mark that this cannot refer to anybody else. He's of the 7. How is she of the 7? In which way? You see, the papacy, as the 8th king, or the completion of this power, this beast power, she's coming back as the 5th. As the 5th king, we saw her ruling over Europe. She had the power of the kings and governments of the time and the backing of the army. She would place nations under interdict. And whether through wars or through interdicts, she would rule over the nations. And that's her rule of bloodshed we saw for that period that John looked at. Then she goes through her bottomless pit experience. Then the wound is healed. And the days we're living in today. But she still doesn't have that power over all the world. Now we see this union with the governments and the powers of the world giving their strength. They're having one mind and their strength and power to her. Once again, she's ruling the world. And the same way she ruled before, because we're told Rome does not change. But this time, as the 5th, she ruled Europe. But now she rules all the world. That's why it says she is of the 7. She is the 5th king come back. But this time, the completion of Satan's design. Notice in the chart here, illustrating the 7 kings of Revelation 17. Babylon was the first kingdom, Medo-Persia the second, and Greece, pagan Rome. The 5th kingdom was the papal Rome during the 1260, the was period. The 6th was when she received her wound, went into the bottomless pit. He is not. And the prophecy said that she was to ascend out of that pit. That happened in 1929, when she received full civil ecclesiastical authority. And that is called the yet is phase, and it's a short space. We're at the very end of that space now. We're seeing that happening today in the world with many events that are taking place, merging of currencies, etc., merging of banks and other things. And the last one, which is the accumulation of all these, the eighth king, which is of the seven, Papal Rome, worldwide church and state, exactly where we began our study in Daniel 2, churchcraft and statecraft. The kings, the powers of the world will have one mind, and they'll give their power and their strength under the papacy. You'll have a new world order. He's of the seven. He's the fifth king come back. See, the fifth was Satan's experiment, you could say. What he did in Europe, he has planned from the beginning to do to the entire world. And now it's its accumulation. Now it's come to fruition, finally, through his deceptions. He's come back as the fifth, but this time controlling not just Europe, but the whole world. The beast is complete, that great city that ruleth over the kings of the world. But it doesn't end there, thankfully. We come down to verse 14. Notice what it goes on to say in Revelation 17. These shall make war with the Lamb. So this new world order, the governments of the world, the military governments and powers, and the religious elements of the world coming together, Protestantism, apostate, Catholicism, and all the other religions of the world, all coming together under Rome, going to make war with the Lamb. When it says make war with the Lamb here, this is making war with God's people. Notice what it goes on to say. The Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. You see, when these New World Order is put in place and religious laws are enacted, those who refuse to bow to the image of the beast, refuse to receive his mark or worship his image, we know that finally a death decree was issued. First, they're black banned from buying and selling, and they're persecuted financially, economically, in every way, socially. Finally, the last point of the persecution is the death decree. This is what it means when it says they make war with the Lamb. When they make war with God's people, they're making war with Jesus. Because they're persecuting him in the person of his saints, as we're told. But notice what happens. Let's read verse 15 as well. And he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are people and multitudes, nations and tongues. Again we see this great counterfeit system, Babylon the Great, controlling all nations, waters, people and tongues, controlling the whole world perfectly in its context. But now something happens now. Something intriguing happens. Suddenly, let's read verse 16. Before we read it, we have this union, the whole world, finally under the complete control of the devil. There is only this tiny little remnant that is remaining faithful to God. Every nation, government and power is under the same control. And they, as we read here, they have one mind. They give their power and their strength to the beast. But now suddenly something happens. Let's read verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and make her desolate and naked, shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Suddenly you see a rebellion, you see these chaotic scenes taking place. Suddenly the people are turning against each other, particularly they're turning upon the whore. What went wrong? Come back to verse 14. It says that the Lamb shall overcome them. When is it that the Lamb overcomes his enemies? Notice this from the Spirit of Prophecy, great controversy. You see, we have, coming down this prophecy in Revelation 17, you have this accumulation of powers coming together, religious and state. Persecution getting stronger and stronger against that little remnant holding out against the religious laws and the dictates of conscience. And so as the persecution gets greater, we know that it finally leads to this death decree that is issued, and that's where it picks up here. Notice what happens. This is where the Lamb overcomes his enemies. When the voice of God turns the captivity of his people, there is a terrible awakening of those who have lost all in the great conflict of life. We stop there for a moment. I just want to mention something I forgot. When Jesus overcomes his enemies, it's actually before he comes. You see, when the Lord returns, his enemies are destroyed. What we're reading now here is when they're overcome. It's something that happens that they see notwithstanding the plagues that are falling, by the way. But it's something else that happens that totally overcomes Satan and all those under his control. Notice what happens. The voice of God turns the captivity of his people. There is a terrible awakening of those who have lost all in the great conflict of life. Notice we read here that they would turn on each other, they would hate the whore. Notice what happens. The people see they have been deluded. They accuse one another of having led them to destruction. But all unite in heaping the bitterest condemnation upon the ministers. Let's stop there for a moment. Come back to Revelation 17:16. Notice it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, he shall hate the whore, shall make her desolate, and naked, shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Remember who the whore represented? Represented Babylon, the counterfeit system that was controlling the papacy to begin with, and which controlled all the world. Who does Babylon represent? Because Babylon's a spiritual term, but in the physical sense, because these people are attacking somebody. It says they're attacking the whore, and they can't attack something that's spiritual. We're reading of bloodshed, of war, and the taking of life. So who are they attacking when it says the whore? They're attacking the ministers. The ministers who Babylon represents, or who Babylon uses. In other words, those who teach the doctrines of Babylon. That's who they're turning on. And that's what we're reading here. The people that seem to have been deluded by who? Notice, they accuse one another of having led them to destruction. See, this is after God has spoken from heaven. His people have been delivered. And they all unite in heaping their bitterest condemnation upon who? The ministers. That's who the whore is, friends, here. Great Controversy 655. It's the ministers, the priests, the leaders. Unfaithful pastors have prophesied smooth things. They have led their hearers to make void the law of God and to persecute those who would keep it holy. Now in their despair, these teachers confess before the world their work of deception. Notice, they confess it before the world. The multitudes are filled with fury. Notice how it brings out exactly what we're reading in Revelation 17:16 here. They're filled with fury. We are lost, they cry. And you are the cause of our ruin. This is the unfaithful pastors and the ministers. And they turn upon the false shepherds. The very ones that once admired them most will pronounce the most dreadful curses upon them. You see, when this New World Order was coming together and these men were preaching the great sermons and uniting the world with this great ecumenical movement and casting contempt upon that little remnant who would stand loyal to God as the troublers of all the calamities in the world, these people were uplifting these men as admiring them greatly. But now it says, the ones that once admired them most will pronounce the most dreadful curse upon them. The very hands that once crowned them with laurels will be raised for their destruction. The swords which were to slay God's people are now employed to destroy their enemies. Everywhere there is strife and bloodshed. It goes on to say, the work of destruction begins among those who have professed to be the spiritual guardians of the people. Again, it's what you're reading in Revelation 17:16, that they hate the whore and shall make her desolate. That's where destruction begins. The false watchmen are the first to fall. And then we quotes here from Zechariah, a beautiful prophecy, again regarding this time. The Lord cometh out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth. Notice this. For their iniquity the earth shall also disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain. Let's stop there for a moment. Come to Revelation 18:24. What do we read? And in her was found what? The blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. That's in the whore, and that's what it's saying here. The earth will disclose the blood, and shall no more cover her slain. And this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongues shall consume away in their mouth. And it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. In the mad strife of their own fierce passions, and by the awful outpouring of God's unmingled wrath, fall the wicked inhabitants of the earth, priests, rulers, and people, rich and poor, high and low. So here we see both with the plagues that are coming from the Lord and the fierce passion from the people themselves that they destroy each other. Again, it's what we're seeing in Revelation 17:16. And notice what it said here. It says that the great tumult from the Lord shall be among them. What do we read in Revelation 17? in verse 17, after they destroy the whore, it says, "For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will." You see, so again you see a perfect parallel. This prophecy has brought us all the way through from the beginning, where the woman, the vision in the wilderness period, has taken us all the way through to the second coming of Christ, and where God delivers his people. So although we began this study, and this Babylon was called a great mystery, and the Apostle John was greatly astonished and confused at what he saw and could not understand it, the angel said that he would show him the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her. And as we've studied through this chapter, we've seen the history of Rome, the papacy. We've seen her past, the 1260-year period. We saw her present, which is the time we're actually living in today. And we saw her future. She's going into perdition. And here we're reading the very end of the whole system that the devil has sought to build in order to destroy God and his people. The beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. She's going to take almost all the world with her, except for a little remnant. Let's finish with chapter 17 and verse 14 again. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And that little remnant, again, if you study Daniel 2, you'll see there's a potter's clay in the toes as well. There's a faithful people there, a clay that is used by the Lord, by the master potter. And there you're reading about them again here. They that are called and chosen and faithful. Another thing to keep in mind, I forgot to mention. When we read in Daniel 2 about the toes, they would mingle with the seed of men, but they would not cleave one to another. That's what Revelation 17:16 is bringing out. You had the mingling, the previous two verses, Revelation 17:12. You have the 10 kings coming together with the beast. They have one mind. They give their power and strength under the beast. You have this union, this mingling, this marriage. And it's really the accumulation of everything Satan has designed from the beginning. But it's certainly a union there. And then it collapses. It falls apart. The whole system collapses and the people attack the very ones who built it up. That's where they don't cleave one to another. It's not referring to the previous rulers in Europe. It may have an application there, but remember, Daniel 2 brought us to the second coming. And that's where this union was coming together, the iron and the clay. And they wouldn't cleave. In Revelation 17:16, you see where they don't cleave. And that's what we're reading here, where the people unite, heaping the bitterest condemnation upon the ministers and unfaithful pastors. Let's finish with this chart to just summarize what we learned. Revelation 17:10 summarized. We have notice the perfect harmony again with Daniel in Revelation 13. The 5 fallen kingdoms, from when the angel speaks in Revelation 17:10, was papal Rome, was the 5th. It was from when the wounded stage, remember, we saw. And then there was pagan Rome, of course, imperial Rome. Then Greece, Medo, Persia, Babylon, perfect harmony, Daniel and Revelation. The next kingdom was papal Rome in the wounded state, the 6th. Or the is not stage. And then we have papal Rome healed. And the 8th, which was of the 7, was that Holy Alliance, the papal Rome, the New World Order. And that brings us down to the end times, second advent of Christ. Again, notice Revelation 17:8 and 17:10. These are the 2 verses I appeal to everyone watching this presentation to study carefully. I may have not presented it as well as I would have liked, but if you see the connection with these 2 verses, you cannot but see it. This is flowing. This whole chapter flows. This is where it all comes together. Revelation 17:8. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Notice the was, it lines up with the 5th fallen kingdom, as we saw. The next phase, the is not, lines up with papal Rome wounded, 1798 to 1929. And the final, and the following phase, the 7th king, where he ascends out of the bottomless pit, the wound being healed, 1929 till our day. And the final phase was what? The 8th, which goes where? Into perdition. And Revelation 17:10 says there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, the 5th being papal Rome. And 1 is papal Rome wounded. And the hour is not yet come. It was still future at that time when she would receive the wound and be healed. And again it says in verse 11, she's going into perdition. So friends, this is the study on Revelation 17:10. I pray that it'll be a blessing to many, and I welcome any objections to it, and that we can all together, in the Spirit of Christ, come to know all the truth God has revealed to His people at this time.